Welcome back to Armour Up, Women of Reputation. My name is Erica. I am your lovely host. And today we're going to dive right into our study of Tamar. But FYI, if you would like a workbook to go along with this study, by all means you can purchase it from Amazon.com. The link is in the description below. Until then, let's get started. So let's take notice that this narrative concerning Judah sits right in the middle of the story concerning his brother Joseph. And you're reminded that Judah, along with his brothers, conspired to throw their brother into a pit and then pulled him out and sold him into slavery. That Joseph. A Canaanite. Okay, so let's keep in mind that Canaanites weren't exactly the friends of the people of God, the people of Israel. And second, if you go back to earlier in Genesis with Abraham, so in Genesis chapter 28:1, Abraham commanded his son Isaac not to marry a woman of the Canaanites. Okay, so now this is the one that Tamar is married to. Her husband has just died and they have no heir. There is no children. So what happens is Judah is going to follow behind the culture and the law of that time, which is go into your brother's wife, raise up an offspring for your brother. This ancient custom is which a brother would marry his deceased brother's wife if she had no offspring, in order to have a child to carry on the deceased brother's name. The first son born would be the legal descendant of the brother. You can look at this in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 through 10. Onan, knowing the child would not be his, rebelled, so to speak, and this was displeasing to God, so the Lord took his life. Okay, so one thing to think about is that he is basically dishonoring his brother by not wanting to produce an heir. Then the second thing is that once the woman conceived, the brother was no longer allowed to lay with her because that would be considered incest after that. So my thought process is, if he's doing this, then is this him taking advantage of the fact that he gets to lay with his brother's wife with absolutely no intent at all at producing an heir? Do you see where I'm going here? Do you see? If not, think about it. Then also think about the inheritance, okay? So let's talk briefly about the inheritance. So male children would get an inheritance from their father. So half of it would have gone to because the oldest child gets half. Then 1/4 goes to all the other children. So is deceased, so half or 1/4 would go to his older son. If he does not have a descendant, then the next oldest would get the half. So I'm not saying that, that was like his agenda or that was like his purpose. I'm just saying it's something to think about, right? So after the death of Onan, Judah basically tells Tamar, he's like, hey, go live in your father's house as a widow until my youngest son has grown up and he's older, and then perhaps she can conceive an heir through him. That's what he said. But what he's thinking is, there ain't no way in the world. Okay, so let's think a little bit about perception here. Perception. So Judah's perception of my girl Tamar is twisted and tainted based on incomplete information. Now, I want you to take some time to think about that and how often our perception about things is twisted and tainted, usually based on wrong or incomplete information. So when we think about perception, we have to be mindful about how we perceive events, circumstances, and in particularly people. I want you to go back to Eve in the garden. And what did the enemy do when he was talking to her? He changed her perception about God, right? And with that change of perception, what did Eve end up doing? She ended up sinning against God. So Tamar is completely oblivious to this. She has no idea about what Judah, her father-in-law, who by the way is supposed to be looking out for her, she has no idea what's going on in his mind. Imagine if they had had a conversation about it, What if he had just set it up front and been honest and said, you know what? I'm not sure if I want you to marry my third boy, because think about it. 2 of my sons, they're dead. And right now, I'm just not too certain about that. About us. I remember when I went to this job and it was like my first day, and it's the first day at your new job. It's kind of nerve-wracking. But later on, one of the girls I ended up becoming friends with said, girl, when I first met you, I did not like you. What? Everybody likes me. I'm super friendly. When I first met you, you were in the office and I said hi to you and you gave me this look and turned your head and didn't even say hi back. Number one, I was super nervous on that day. So had I known that you were speaking to me, I would have definitely spoken back. I'd been like, hey! That would have actually made me feel a whole lot better. But more than likely, if she said hi, I didn't realize she was saying hi to me. And if I gave her a look that wasn't intentional, it was a nervous first day. I don't know. But once she got to know me, she realized that I'm not the type of person where if you're like, hi, I'm just like, that's not me. And she's like, I thought you were a snob and stuck up. No, far from it. Her misunderstanding or not having all the information or whatever caused her to have a twisted perception of me. And it wasn't until she collected the information that she got a better understanding. Oh, she wasn't ignoring me or being rude. She had no idea, more than likely, that I was talking to her. That's not how Erica rolls. Erica is not a type of person, right? Right. She had no husband to provide or protect her, no child to carry on the family name. Males inherit from their father. Women do not get an inheritance. There'd be no one to take care of her as she got older. Plus, they were living in a honor and shame society. So for her to be a widow and to be childless, that was a very shameful position for her. Widows were the vulnerable part of society, along with the fatherless, the poor, and also with orphans. So these are the ones that people were supposed to look out for and take care of. As a matter of fact, the church today are supposed to look after these. But as we can see, Judah, who was in the position to help and do something, did nothing. Just saying. And the youngest son has grown up. And then what happens is you've got Judah, his wife passes away. So sorry. And then after his days of mourning, he goes down to shear sheep, which is something that they did, during the springtime. They go, either the owner of the sheep would be the one to shear the sheep, or they would have a shearer. But anyway, they're gonna go cut the wool off sheep. So then Tamar gets word about her father-in-law. So now I want you to think about Tamar's position that we just talked about. And I want you to think about how this woman is now living with her father, and when her father dies, okay, she's gonna have nothing. So she does something. So Judah sees her and he believes her to be a harlot, a prostitute. And so instead of being, a righteous man and walking by and keeping on going, no, Judah's gonna step to the side. He gonna go holler at this prostitute. Okay. All right, so he says, "Here now, let me come into you." And then she said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" And then he said, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." And then she said, "Will you give a pledge?" And then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" Then she said, "Your seal, your cord, and your staff that is in your hand." And he gave them to her. What? Okay, so the seal, or some Bibles say the signet, is like an amulet of a ring. And so what happens is it makes an impression, and that impression has like a symbol or whatever, but it identifies the person. Like for us, it would be like a signature. Like if you sign your name on something, you have your own distinct signature, then they're like, "Oh yeah, Erica Lewis, she signed that." So that's what they were doing. It was like it's almost like power and authority. You seal it, you put that seal on it, and that identifies the owner or the person who, whatever, but it identifies that person. Think about in the book of Esther. So when the king, signed that decree for all of the Israelites to be destroyed, he used what? He used his signet, he used his seal. And that would identify, it identifies power and authority, and then on top of it, it identifies who he is. So that's basically what a signet is. And I'm kind of thrown about because I'm like, why would you just give that to some strange girl? You don't know her name. Perhaps the cord was like an object, like a rope or something that would bind things together. I haven't read one where they even suggested that maybe the signet or the seal may have hung on that and then hung around his neck. I don't know. And then lastly, you have the staff, which it was not unusual. I mean, men walked around and they had staffs. And when you think about it, why not? You got that staff with you. It's a little bit more easier to tread on, some harsh terrain. You got a little extra support, and you also have a weapon. Pah! If like some animal tries to attack you, bam, bam, bam. What? Behold the staff, baby. Nevertheless, all three of these objects would specifically identify Judah. It's like having 3 pieces of identification when you go to the bank. We need 3 pieces of identification. The Bible tells us that Tamar conceived. And so afterwards, she just goes back to the house. She takes off the veil and stuff and puts back on her widow clothes. And then what happens is Judah, he goes back to his crib, and then he tries to send what he had promised to her. So Judah sent a young goat back to her by his friend, the Adulamite, and to receive his pledge. She was nowhere to be found. Judah, unable to get these items to her, he's like, you know what? Don't even worry about it. I can't be a laughing stock in front of these people. So Judah is basically okay with the fact that he owes a debt to someone, he promised a debt to someone, and he's okay with not paying it. Like, it's not even a big deal. Okay. So 3 months later, Judah gets some very interesting information, okay? So the word comes to him, hey man, your daughter-in-law is pregnant by harlotry. So through harlotry, she has conceived a child. And so Judah, his response is fascinating. Bring her out and let her be burned. Really? Time out. Don't let anybody ever tell you or convince you that you can't do things for God because either you can't meet the bar, or because you're not good enough, or because you have a past, or whatever the case may be. Because at the end of the day, God can use whomever he wants to use. And as we can see, Judah, which is where the Messiah would descend from, this brother has got some questionable characteristics. Very questionable. Because at this point of the story, I'm not a big fan of Judah. I don't even like him. You know what I mean? So Tamar's crime was not punishable to the point of you need to burn her. That was set aside for more severe things. Her punishment would have just been stoning, right? But he has gone to the extreme and he's like, no, we gotta burn her. And my thought process is, so we gotta burn her, huh? Do we? Do you? Because I'm wondering, what is the punishment for hating your brother? What is the punishment for conspiring and throwing your brother in a pit? What is the punishment for selling your brother? What is the punishment for lying to your father and then showing him a fraudulent evidence of your brother being murdered or mauled by an animal by putting blood on there that belonged to an animal and not your brother? What are the punishments for that, huh, Judah? What are they? Yes, brother, pull that plank out of your eye. Pull it out. So actually, his response reminds me a little bit of King David, right? So after King David sins with Bathsheba and he has Bathsheba's husband like murdered or whatever, and then Nate the prophet comes to him and tells him the story about the poor man and his little lamb. And then the rich man comes and takes the poor man's little baby lamb, even though the rich man had plenty and he could have picked one from his flock, all so that he could serve some guest that was coming to see him. And he left that poor man with nothing. And then David is like, as the Lord lives, this man deserves to die. Does he? Does he, David? Because you know what? You are that man. You don't have to repeat the sins of your fathers. You have the choice to do something completely different. Because when I think about Jesus and we look at his lineage, okay, look at his lineage, and you will see people in there with all kinds of questionable behaviors. In his family tree, Jesus has adulterers, murderers, liars, deceivers, prostitutes, fake prostitutes. I mean, these were not these squeaky clean, high society, living the complete righteous life kind of people. And then you look at Christ. And all that they say, hey, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Yeah, it can. By God, it can. Because Jesus did not follow in those footsteps of the people who walked before him. And we too can do the exact same thing. We don't have to repeat everything. Just because if I come from a family of alcoholics, drug addicts, and unemployed people, and people who just didn't want to do anything, I don't have to be that way. I can choose to walk in a different direction and do something else. As so can you. So I got like this picture in my head of like, they're coming to take Tamar and they're gonna burn her. I am with child by the man whom these things belong to. Da 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 da. Yeah, investigate. Go get him too, so the staff, the cord, the signet, all of that is laid out before Judah. Here you go. Do you recognize these, boo-boo? Do you know who these belong to? I'm just curious. My thought is, like, when I read this, I immediately think of, like, an episode of The Maury Show. You know what I mean? Judah, you are the father. And then the whole crowd goes, ah, what? I didn't see that coming. Ah, snap, best episode ever. So Judah sees these things and he sees his staff and he's just like, he knows, okay? He like knows. But here's where I see something different about him, because he admits that he was wrong. What? Okay, there is something to learn from. When you're wrong, don't have a problem admitting that you're wrong. You know, when I used to read this narrative, I used to always be like, dang, Tamar, you just real deceptive, you know. But now that I have a better understanding about why she did what she did, and the fact that when we look at it, Tamar wasn't trying to be mean or hateful or anything like that, because she could have just said, here, look, this is Judah's stuff. He the baby daddy. But, you know, she didn't do that. She was like, the man who fathered this child, these are his things. And they were sent to Judah, and he was given an opportunity to, hey, recognize this and do the right thing. You know what I mean? She was being discreet about it. She wasn't trying to shame him or embarrass him in any way. You know what I mean? All Tamar wanted was for him to do right by her. So as I look at Tamar's narrative here, I see a woman who did what she had to do in order to survive. She was not going to sit and be passive. She was not going to sit and be this victim, you know, because it would have been easy to say, you know what, Judah, he did this and he wouldn't do that, and then allow all of these things to just occur, you know. Her father passes away and then she goes without anything because she never even fought for anything. And so I see a woman who was courageous enough to stand up for herself when nobody else was standing up for her. I see a woman who was failed, just like Eve was failed, and the same thing with Bathsheba, which you'll see in our next segment. You see women who were failed by the same people who were supposed to be looking out for their best interests. And don't we always have the same problem, you know? People may fail us, and the same people that we're like, you're supposed to be like looking out for me, and then they don't do it. People fail, but God, as we can see, never fails. His promises cannot be broken. His promises are threatened, but they're not broken. So with what Tamar did, she was able to survive, but on top of that, she preserved the line of Judah, from which our Messiah would descend. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Armor Up. I hope that you were able to learn some things. Please come back next week as we study Bathsheba, right? And don't forget to stop by our Facebook page and like and follow. Until next time.
Yahweh created the heavens and earth. When finished, created Adam, both men and women in his image. A privilege. No Yahweh, trust and obey the limit. Grab the enemy, fellowship, paradise, diminish. Darkness, evil, spiritual warfare. We're not casualties of principalities of the air. We are not defeated.